Weaponizing his Justice Department against his political enemies. This time he's targeting officials in Minnesota. MS Now has confirmed that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey are under federal investigation by the Trump Justice Department. The Washington Post adds this: the Justice Department has issued subpoenas for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey as part of an investigation alleging that the two Democratic leaders are impeding federal law enforcement's abilities to do their jobs in the state. Two people familiar with the matter confirmed Friday. Governor Tim Walz responded in a statement saying, quote, 2 days ago, it was Alyssa Slotkin. Last week, it was Jerome Powell. Before that, Mark Kelly. Weaponizing the justice system and threatening political opponents is a dangerous authoritarian tactic. The only person not being investigated for the shooting of Renee Good is the federal agent who shot her. Mayor Jacob Frey's office released this statement, quote, this is an obvious attempt to intimidate me for standing up for Minneapolis, our local law enforcement, and our residents against the chaos and the danger this administration has brought to our streets. I will not be intimidated. My focus will remain where it has always been, keeping our city safe. America depends on leaders that use integrity and the rule of law as the guideposts for governance. Neither our city nor our country will succumb to this fear. We stand rock solid, end quote. Now, this all comes after Donald Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy troops to Minneapolis, an act that could potentially inflame the situation on the ground even more. ICE agents are using increasingly aggressive tactics when dealing with members of the community there, regardless of their immigration status. The Minnesota Star Tribune's editorial board described it as a military occupation. State Representative Michael Howard said it feels like our community is under siege. Elliot Payne, president of the Minneapolis City Council, called it a war zone. The county attorney in Minneapolis, Mary Moriarty, told MS Now that ICE is causing chaos and that people are frightened. Here's more of what she had to say.
I think what people are asking here is who is here to protect us? We are under attack by our own federal government, which is unprecedented. We're peaceful, and we're trying to exercise our First Amendment rights. And even when we're doing that, you've seen video where we've had peaceful protesters doing what they're allowed to do. We've had ICE officers come up to them and make threats like, aren't you aware, didn't you learn from what happened with Renee Good's killing? That's what they're saying to peaceful protesters. People are frightened to go out into the community. And I'll tell you, every parent I know has had to figure out how to have a conversation with their child about that child's fear that ICE is going to come and take the child away, or their parent away, or their friends away. There's no assurance as to what's going to happen to anybody who doesn't have white skin, who is out in the public.
Who is here to protect us, she asks. The Democratic Congresswoman Kelly Morrison, who represents suburbs around Minneapolis, shared a report with the Minneapolis Star Tribune about how ICE enforcement has resulted in children getting hurt. Quote, it's abhorrent to hear the many stories that have emerged, Morrison said, describing an incident where a Minnesota family allegedly had 3 of their 6 children hospitalized after ICE agents threw flashbang grenades and tear gas. Their 6-month-old infant stopped breathing and lost consciousness, Morrison said. Morrison, by the way, is a physician. The Star Tribune also reports on ICE agents who dined at a family-owned Mexican restaurant before detaining 3 of the workers who served them. Quote, staff at the restaurant were frightened, said the eyewitness. Agents followed the workers after they closed up for the night. A handful of bystanders blew whistles and shouted at agents as they detained people. Would your mama be proud of you right now? One of the bystanders asked. We're also learning more about the chaotic moments after Renee Good was shot and killed by the ICE agent Jonathan Ross. According to newly released documents by the Minneapolis Fire Department and the Minneapolis Police Department, Renee Good died after suffering 4 wounds from gunshots. The Star Tribune reports, quote, Good had 2 apparent gunshot wounds to the right side of her chest, 1 to her left forearm, and 1 to the left side of her head. According to the report, Renee Good was still alive when paramedics arrived on the scene at 9:42 a.m., 5 minutes after the shooting, which makes the video that we've seen of a physician immediately offering to help but being denied by ICE on the scene that much more disturbing. The Star Tribune reports that starting at 9:38 a.m., 911 calls from residents are laced with shouts in the intensity of the moment. They just shot a lady point blank range in her car, a caller says. She's expletive dead. They expletive shot her. There's 15 ICE agents and they shot her because she wouldn't open her car door. Send an ambulance, please. The Star Tribune reports, quote, the Department of Homeland Security told Fox News this week that Ross suffered internal bleeding from being hit by Good's car, but there's no documentation in the incident report that he required any medical attention after killing Good. Here is new visual analysis with additional video compiled by the New York Times.
This moment is when Agent Ross fires. We see the other agent pull back from the SUV. Both of them stumble, apparently slipping on the ice. This is also the moment many have said looks like Agent Ross getting run over. And it does when watched at full speed. But looking more closely, we can see in multiple angles that there's a visible gap between the vehicle and his legs, indicating his feet are positioned outside the SUV's path. The agent's left hand is still against the vehicle and gripping his phone. We see as he fires, it's recording the clouds and the trees overhead. It's not because the agent is knocked to the ground. The other angle shows he's still standing, continuing to maintain his grip on his phone and his gun, and we see a clear and growing gap between his body and the SUV as he fires a second shot and a third.
In a potential sign of accountability, MS Now obtained a letter from a law firm representing Renee Good's family to multiple federal agencies and to the ICE agent Jonathan Ross, who shot and killed Renee Good, demanding evidence relating to Renee Good's death be preserved. The letter, which also outlines potential legal claims her surviving family might bring, says, quote, you are hereby notified that they anticipate bringing legal action against the United States of America, Jonathan Ross, U.S. Customs Enforcement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Homeland Security, the United States of America, and or others arising from the incident, including for the excessive use of force against and the battery of Renee Good, negligence, intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress, wrongful imprisonment, and other similar wrongful acts. The letter includes a long list of the documents and electronic information that must be preserved, including Renee Good's autopsy and her car and Jonathan Ross's prior uses of force. They are also demanding information about, quote, ICE, DHS, and DOJ policies and practices related to the use of force, approaching of vehicles, and or recording of activity. MS Now's David Noriega reports that according to his review of court records and media reports, federal immigration agents, some working for ICE, others for Border Patrol, have fired their guns at people in their cars at least 14 times since July. So, leading off our discussion tonight is MS Now national reporter David Noriega. David, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. Let's start with this conversation because we've seen anecdotal reports of it, and every time we see video of an officer shooting into someone's car, it's usually followed by a response from Customs or from DHS that they were somehow doing something or being provocative. In some of these cases, that's been debunked.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ali. Look, what my reporting found is the top line is sort of on two levels. First, it's what happens in the field, these shootings themselves, these at least 14 incidents in which either Border Patrol or ICE agents have fired their weapons either into vehicles or at vehicles. And nearly all of those cases that I've been able to document, these were people who were trying to drive away in one way or another. The difference primarily between those incidents and the Renee Good incident is the fact that Agent Ross was standing in front of the vehicle when she started moving. Now, I also want to point out, Ali, that one of the categories of people that I spoke to for this story are policing experts, including a couple of former chiefs of major urban departments in the United States who were unanimous in telling me that best practices in American law enforcement says not only that you do not shoot at moving vehicles, but that you do not put yourself in front of vehicles that could potentially be moving at any given moment. One former police chief actually told me, Ali, that if he were, if Ross were one of his officers and he were tasked with assessing accountability in this particular incident, even if Ross authentically believed that Renee Good was driving his vehicle at him, the explanation would still not be justified because he put himself in, the term of art is a situation of officer-created jeopardy. Now, Ali, in many of these cases, people were injured but not killed. There is one other fatal shooting of a person in a vehicle. The case of Silverio Villegas Gonzalez happened in Chicago last year, 38-year-old father of two. As in all of these cases, DHS claimed that he tried to run over agents with his vehicle, a claim that was later directly contravened by video evidence. In many other cases, what happened to, we're just finding out about the exact injuries that Renee Good suffered. These, at least 3, possibly an additional gunshot wound from what we know are 3 bullets Agent Ross fired at her. I have been documenting now many instances in which that came extremely close to happening. I talked to a guy in D.C., U.S. citizen, black guy from Brooklyn, has lived in D.C. for several years, also a father, who was shot at by an ICE agent during what he described as a stop that felt more like a carjacking than a law enforcement stop. One of the bullets went through the collar of his jacket. And I want to read you a quote of something that he told me on the phone. He said, those 3 bullets that they let off at her, at Renee Good, are the same bullets that they let off at me. I just so happen to be the survivor. And there are many more cases very similar to that one.
So there's 2 things here. One is, this is the reporting on this, where you talk to these experts and say that it's been a long time. A police officer doesn't walk in front, should not be walking in front of a running car in any situation. And it's been in place for decades, this thinking that once somebody has passed you in a car, whether you think they're guilty of something or not, you generally don't shoot at them, because if you shoot at them and you incapacitate them, their car is likely to hit somebody else or something else, which is exactly what happened in the case of Renee Good. But part of it is the speed with which the administration, Kristi Noem, then Donald Trump, then J.D. Vance, came out with interpretations of video that are relatively easily countered by what we've seen, by the work you've done, by the work that I put on TV, by what the New York Times has done. There's your own eyes. You can look at this stuff and come to at least some conclusion. We're not forensic experts, but we can come to some conclusions.
Yeah, Ali, the way that the Department of Homeland Security and its spokespersons handles the facts of these incidents in the media, and also handles the legal process, the facts in the legal process in some of the criminal cases that they've brought against some of the individuals who were shot at, 4 of which, by the way, have either been dropped by prosecutors or dismissed by judges. I should just say quickly, only 4 of the 14 cases that I analyzed actually led to criminal proceedings that are ongoing, that have stuck, right? The rest either didn't lead to proceedings at all, or were thrown out or stopped by the DOJ themselves. But the way that DHS handles facts in these incidents is that there's a telling detail here. When I reached out to them for general comment on this story, I also asked about a few individual incidents that I'd done sort of deep dives on, knew all the video, understood the facts. And in all of those incidents, they came back to me with the exact same statements that they had made before when these incidents originally happened, accusing these people of trying to run over agents with their cars, which, again, is directly and amply contravened in the video. So that is the situation that we're in, Ali. Is that these are this is the handling of facts that we need to contend with.
David, thank you for your great reporting. We appreciate it. In times like this, we actually need this kind of thing. Just look at the actual video, talk to the people involved, try to get an explanation on it. David Noriega, MS Now's national reporter. Joining us now is Barbara McQuade, former United States attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She is an MS Now legal analyst. Barbara, thank you for being with us. I want to go back to the beginning of this story, and that is that there's been a new development in which the Department of Justice is now going after the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis. I need you to help me understand this, because there are clearly always jurisdictional issues, disagreements, arguments between different levels of government. What does this mean, that the Department of Justice is pursuing legal action against these 2 men?
Well, your inability to understand what's happening here, Ali, is well placed, because this is not like anything we have seen before. Certainly, different leaders in government can have different views on things. They can even squabble about things. President Trump has been famous for doing that. But this idea that the Justice Department is investigating Governor Walz and Mayor Frey criminally for their statements against ICE is absolutely absurd. There is a federal statute that makes it a crime to impede the work of a federal agent, but that statute requires physical force. If you as much as touch someone when they're trying to do their job, that could be seen as impeding or obstructing. And we've seen some cases charged for that with very minimal physical contact. But the idea that words alone, by saying we don't want ICE in our community, get them out of here, by suggesting that people should be applauded for peacefully protesting, is absolutely not a violation of any federal statute and is most certainly an infringement of First Amendment rights, perhaps designed to intimidate or chill the exercise of those rights.
Right, because if you go for people like governors and mayors, then what have the rest of us got to stand up on? This business of impeding, it is used very commonly by DHS and ICE and Customs Enforcement. It is, in fact, for the people who whistle, who say that they're warning their neighbors that ICE is coming. There are some people in ICE who consider that impeding and obstructing justice. We're bumping up against First Amendment stuff here, and I kind of want to remind people the First Amendment's not sort of a throwaway. It's not really an extra. It's not a little thing that's a favor to people. It is a right, and in some cases an obligation.
Absolutely right. And, you know, the law is careful to try to draft statutes that avoid infringing upon people's First Amendment rights or Fifth Amendment rights of due process to provide fair notice of what the law prohibits to prevent discriminatory enforcement. And so this law of impeding federal agents requires that there be this physical force. And I think Congress drew the line there to prevent this sort of thing. If people are merely shouting or, in this instance, taking videos with their phone, that's not enough to be impeding. Now, if you get in their way, if you block their ability to get from point A to point B, now we're talking about potential violation. But simply peacefully standing on the sidelines, even blowing a whistle, even mouthing off, even saying disrespectful things is not enough to amount to a criminal offense.
I do want to ask you, because Donald Trump continues to raise the specter of the Insurrection Act. For most Americans, we've blown so far beyond what we think is reasonable here. What's the significance of whether or not the Insurrection Act is invoked?
Yes, it really does raise the stakes even higher than we've already seen, Allie. We've seen in some jurisdictions the president calling up the National Guard. The Supreme Court last month hinted that it appeared, at least preliminarily, that those invocations were not lawful because it didn't arise to the level of being unable to control the situation with the use of regular forces and concluding that regular forces means military forces. To now say he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act would be to use military forces. So two main differences from what we've seen before. Instead of just the National Guard, it is active military forces that could be used on the streets of American cities. And in contrast to what we've seen to date, it is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. That is that statute that goes way back hundreds of years that prohibits the military from enforcing criminal laws against U.S. citizens. So we could see military members conducting arrests and seizures and searches on the streets in huge numbers. So you want to talk about a police state? This would be a military state.
Barbara, as always, thank you for your analysis. Barbara McQuade. All right, coming up, the Trump administration apologized for an ICE action. This is not a joke. Even more extraordinarily, but perhaps not surprising, is how the wrong party, the party that was wronged, responded. I'll tell you about that next. As we learned tonight, Donald Trump's retribution campaign in Minneapolis is escalating. But earlier this week, someone in Donald Trump's administration actually struck a very different note. It was an actual apology that came 2 months after a college freshman was wrongfully detained and deported. Let's go back to November now. November 20th, college freshman, this woman, Amy Lucia Lopez Beloza, was headed home from Boston to Texas to surprise her parents for Thanksgiving. At Boston's Logan International Airport, immigration officers took her into custody. And despite an emergency court order to keep her in the United States for at least 72 hours, she was deported to Honduras, the country she left when she was 7 years old. The Associated Press reports that the Trump administration acknowledged that it violated the judge's order. Quote, government lawyers said an Immigration and Customs Enforcement deportation officer failed to activate a system that alerts other ICE officers that a case is subject to judicial review and that removal should be halted. At a federal court hearing in Boston, Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Sauter said, quote, on behalf of the government, we want to sincerely apologize Mark Sauter told the judge, saying the employee understands he made a mistake. Today, Judge Richard Stearns has asked the Trump administration to consider issuing a visa to Any Lucia Lopez Belosa. The New York Times reports, quote, in an order on Friday, Judge Stearns described Ms. Lopez as an innocent and unsuspecting college student and said there were several legal options the government could take to facilitate her return to the United States. The judge wrote that he preferred to give the government an opportunity to rectify the mistake it acknowledges having made in Any's case before contemplating the issuance of any further order. As such, Judge Stearns directed the Justice Department to relay his decision to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, with a recommendation that the government issue a student visa or other comparable visa to Ms. Lopez. The judge said he expected the government to respond within 21 days. Yesterday, Any Lucia Lopez Belosa said this.
I accept their apologies, and I hope that based on this apology, I'm able to return back to my studies and also to be home with my parents.
Our next guest, the Congressman Greg Casar, represents Austin, Texas, where Any's family lives. On social media, Congressman Casar wrote, quote, horrified by mass deportation policies? While Trump is president, we use every tool available to reduce the harm. But when Democrats win back the White House, true immigration reform must be a top priority so that hardworking families can finally apply for legal status. That's the only way to end this horror once and for all. Joining us now is the Democratic Congressman Greg Casar of Texas. He's the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's also a member of the House Oversight and Education and Workforce Committees. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for covering this really important story.
I'm fascinated because this government doesn't ever apologize for anything. They usually double down. Someone has said that they made a mistake. There was a systems error. But she's still in Honduras. She's still not back in the United States of America. And you know, prior examples in the last year have led me to believe that this administration can slow walk things.
Well, look, the Trump administration has kind of lost the benefit of the doubt on this one. They deported Any, a college student. She grew up here in my district, working class, got into one of the top business schools in the country. Her only crime was trying to surprise her family for Thanksgiving. She was deported. We said it was illegal to deport her, and the Trump administration doubled down. They left her there. A judge now got the Trump administration to admit their mistake, quote unquote, but they haven't brought her back. And so what they need to do is bring her back and stop deporting U.S. citizens and veterans and shooting people in the street. This isn't just one case. This is really a deeply troubling pattern.
So on our side, on the non-member of Congress side, we have the fact that we vote, and frankly, voting every 2 years is not going to be sufficient here. It's important, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary. On your side, what are your options right now? For the moment, the House is not controlled by Democrats and the Senate's not controlled by Democrats. And while you hear rumblings from some Republicans about how some of this ICE stuff has gone too far, you don't really see action.
We need to go on offense on the issue of immigration. Too often as Democrats, we tried to avoid talking about the issue. But the fact is, here in Texas, a state where Republicans have held statewide office basically since I was born, when I go talk to people that voted for Donald Trump, they said they didn't vote for this. They didn't vote for a college student to be deported and then not brought back. They didn't vote for Brene Good to be killed needlessly in Minneapolis. They didn't vote for a Justice Department weaponized against people speaking out, whether they be the governor of Minnesota or, in this case, Annie's parents have faced threats from ICE who broke into their backyard after Annie spoke out about this case. They didn't vote for this. We need to step up and say, you know what, Democrats can go on offense on this. Stop and restrain this recklessness from ICE, and then fight for real immigration reform, because this just isn't working right now.
So Stephen Miller wants 3,000 arrests a day and 1 million people deported. Seems a lot of investment for Annie and her family. but I want to get your sense of what this is really all about. You just mentioned about what happened to her family, so I want to read from the Boston Globe. After she and her father spoke out about her deportation, her family in Austin was targeted by ICE. In December, agents staked out her family home, even bolting toward her father when he was outside and going into the family's backyard, according to her attorney. Now her family in Austin is hunkered down at home in fear of being arrested if they step outside. Community members helped bring her sister, who is 5 years old, to school. So again, it's a lot of investment and energy in one person who happens to be a student, a university student, which is kind of exactly what we all think we'd like immigrants in America to be, right? What's the point here? It's a lot for one person. Is the point to scare everybody who sees this story into saying, we'll come for you too?
The lawlessness and the intimidation is the point. Donald Trump and Stephen Miller want to be able to do whatever they want to anybody that they want in this country, and they don't want folks to speak out. And so when Annie was brave enough to go on national news, and I appreciate this network bringing her on from Central America to speak out about being deported against a judge's orders, the Trump administration didn't want to have that. Just like they've gone after Kilmar Abrego Garcia, just like they've gone after Renee Good's widow. They don't want anyone to be able to speak out. They're wannabe authoritarians, but the reason that they're wannabes is that in America, the vast majority of the American people won't stand for that, and democracy will live on as long as people keep on speaking up despite the threats.
As long as people keep on speaking up despite the threats. This is the important thing about this moment. You don't want to have to tell your kids in 25 years when they said, what did you do when this was happening? You don't want to say nothing. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you as always.
Good to see you, too.
Ken Casar of Texas. All right, coming up, Donald Trump is threatening to raise taxes on us if he doesn't get his way on Greenland. You heard that right. Donald Trump won in 2024. Donald Trump won the state of Wisconsin with 49% of the vote. So coming up next, I'm going to ask a waitress who's running for Congress if that's what she thinks that people in Wisconsin voted for. Today at the White House, Donald Trump further proved that his tariff policy makes zero sense by threatening 25% tariffs on countries who support Denmark's long-standing control of Greenland.
I may put a tariff on countries if they don't go along with Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security, so I may do that.
Right. Donald Trump wants you to pay more in taxes, because that's what a tariff is. It's a tax on American consumers, simply because he's got some weird obsession with taking over Greenland. And in an attempt to save face after allowing Obamacare subsidies to expire, which has resulted in about 1.4 million Americans dropping their health care coverage so far this year, Donald Trump this week released something he's calling a health care proposal. He's calling it that. The New York Times described it like this. The plan was short on specific details and left much of the direction for how to finalize it up to Congress. It amounted to a few paragraphs on a web page released with a video of Mr. Trump promoting what he called the Great Health Care Plan. So, consumer goods are more expensive, housing's more expensive, healthcare, you see the trend here, right? It's more expensive. And neither Donald Trump, the guy who campaigned on lower prices on day one, nor the Republicans on Capitol Hill seem to have any solutions to offer. So it's no wonder Donald Trump continues to say things like this.
In the coming weeks, I will be laying out even more plans to help bring back affordability. And again, remember, that's a fake word by Democrats.
Democrats plan to make that very real word, affordability, the focus of their efforts to regain control of Congress in 2026. Former Biden Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was in La Crosse, Wisconsin tonight, preaching that very message.
And then when you come home from work and go to your home, it ought to be safe and it ought to be affordable. And you ought to have that hope of owning a home. And if you do, when you sit down to do the bills, you shouldn't feel like you've got to choose between your health insurance premium and your mortgage. And when you do those bills, you should still be able to picture how you're going to have a vacation. That's not too much to ask in the United States of America.
All right, joining us now on her way home from that event, literally from a gas station, is Rebecca Cook, Democratic congressional candidate for Wisconsin's 3rd District. Rebecca, you shame us all, because sometimes I'll get a call from my bosses, say some news, can you come on TV? And I'll say, I'm on my way somewhere, or I'm at work, or whatever. You have joined me from your work as a waitress. You've now joined me from a gas station. So first of all, I just have to thank you for your commitment to continuing to have these conversations with us. It's important.
No, well, absolutely. I think it's about, showing up and meeting people where they're at. And you're catching me when I'm getting off of work. You're catching me tonight on my way home in a blizzard in Arcadia, Wisconsin at a Quick Trip. But it's great to be here with you. I'm excited to connect about what we heard here tonight in Wisconsin.
And thanks to the Quick Trip for hosting you there. Let's talk a little about this nonsense that Donald Trump keeps on talking about. He claims to go down these roads of wanting to help people with affordability, and yet everything he does seems to work against it, including now we're apparently going to have a Greenland tax. But this healthcare thing, right? You've been talking about it for months. You understand why this is a real issue, particularly from farming communities like the one you come from. It's not a plan at all. Republicans have had 15 years to come up with a plan. There's no plan. A year ago, Donald Trump said he had a concept of a plan. A year and a half ago.
Right.
It's still nothing but a couple of paragraphs on a webpage.
That's exactly right. I think people in where I live are really struggling to get the help, not just the healthcare access that they need, but to be able to afford it in general. And so I think, what we saw from the House this past week in expanding ACA tax credits, hopefully for another 3 years. If the Senate passes it, it's still another Band-Aid. But with Trump's suggestion just to put some money into an HSA account, I think is totally out of touch of what it actually costs for healthcare in this country. I'm on the Affordable Care Act. I've seen my monthly premium increase by $200 a month. I have an HSA. Throwing $1,000 into that is not going to make a really big difference. And I think what is important here to remember is that Republicans have a supermajority. So they have an opportunity. If you don't like the ACA or you don't like Obamacare, you have an opportunity to do something different, but they don't have a plan. They don't have a concrete plan. I'm running against someone who's on his website has a one-sentence healthcare policy, which is to repeal and replace Obamacare. But with what?
Yeah, I've been hearing that for 15 years.
Exactly. So
give me a suggestion. Give me a plan. We can debate it. I'd be happy to take it apart and debate it and look at its merits. Derek Van Orden, let's talk about this for a second. He voted with Democrats on something. He was one of 17 Republicans who voted with Democrats the other day. Now, he was a guy who wasn't showing up at his own town hall meetings some time ago. What do you make of this?
I think that he is concerned about re-election. He is not concerned about a thoughtful path for having long-term healthcare solutions. He hasn't. He's voted for this to expand the ACA tax credits when it was convenient. But on the other side of his mouth, he's talking about how he wants to repeal Obamacare. And that's, again, he has a one-sentence healthcare policy, and we need more than that. We expect more from our elected leaders. And I think somebody like Derek Van Orden has failed to host any sort of in-person town hall to be accountable for any of the votes that he's taken, including his vote for the reconciliation bill. I've been talking to a lot of rural hospital CEOs across my district. I'm obviously not their elected representative now, but what do you need? What do you need to keep your doors open? How can we change Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement rates so it's easier for you to, provide access to our rural communities? And he's not having those conversations. And people right now are looking for folks that want to show up and not just tell people what they're about, but to listen. And I think we saw that tonight in having Mayor Pete in town in La Crosse. It was a whole heck of a lot of people that turned out, primarily because we don't have a representative that is showing up to listen to them. And people want answers.
Rebecca, good to see you again. I can't wait to see where it is going to be that you and I next talk.
I
Rebecca
like to
Cook
keep you guessing.
No, I love it. It's a lot of fun. Rebecca Cook is a Democrat from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And you're at a gas station. I love it. She's a candidate for the United States House of Representatives. Again, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, Iran's murderous crackdown on people protesting the regime appears to be working. We'll talk about that on the other side. Today, Donald Trump thanked Iran's murderous leaders for supposedly canceling the executions of hundreds of people who are protesting the Iranian regime.
Did Arab and Israeli officials convince you to not strike Iran?
Nobody convinced me. I convinced myself. You had yesterday scheduled over 800 hangings. They didn't hang anyone. They canceled the hangings. That had a big impact.
So, with a nationwide internet blackout imposed by Iran's government since next week, there's no independent way to verify what Donald Trump just said is true. Independent reporting inside Iran is now nearly impossible. As a result, estimates of the death toll vary wildly. A U.S.-based group, the Human Rights Activist News Agency, says it's verified at least 2,571 protester deaths. But other death toll estimates are much higher, claiming as many as 12,000 people have been killed. Online, disinformation is spreading rapidly. The New York Times reports Iran's shutdown of the internet and cellular communications since January 8th appears to be an effort to shield Iranians from such content and suppress accurate reporting of what appears to be intensifying bloodshed that by some accounts has resulted in thousands of deaths. Filling the void has been a deluge of propaganda, disinformation, and influence campaigns from countries or parties trying to shape the outcome of the conflict, end quote. The Times reports that many of those bot accounts are amplifying Iran's opposition figures like Reza Pahlavi, who is the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, who was deposed in 1979. Others have echoed Iran's claim that the unrest was orchestrated by its enemies, especially the United States and Israel, a view that allies like Russia have amplified in their own state media, end quote. Several residents of Tehran reached by Reuters said the capital had now been comparatively quiet for 4 days. Drones were flying over the city, but there had been no signs of major protests on Thursday or Friday. Now, against that backdrop, the Trump administration announced new sanctions on Iran today, targeting the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen and the transfer of oil products, weapons, and other so-called dual-use equipment that it said helped fund the group. Polling shows that most Americans believe Trump has gone too far with overseas military intervention, with 70% opposing military strikes in Iran, even if protesters are killed there. Joining us now is Michael McFaul, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama. He's now an MS Now international affairs analyst. He's the author of Autocrats versus Democrats, China, Russia, America, and the New Global Disorder. Ambassador, good to see you here. The problem with Iran is the last time they had something that resembled democracy and fairness was 1953, and that was taken away from them actually by America. Then they had a monarchy for many years, and now they've had this theocracy for many years. So it's very hard to understand what right looks like in Iran and what a policy looks like that centers the Iranian people. Oh, you're muted, Ambassador.
Let me try that again. There we go. I don't know how that happened. It must have been the Russians or the Iranians, because I was just talking to your producer. A couple of things. So first, incredibly inspirational what these Iranians have done. They want freedom. They've been fighting for it. And anybody has to be moved by that. Second, the horrific slaughter by this illegitimate terrorist regime. These are I think when we get the full count, they'll even be bigger than what you just reported. This is a horrific moment for the Iranian people, and this regime has lost all of its legitimacy forever. That's the good news. The bad news is we don't know what we're doing in terms of trying to help the small D Democrats, the small people fighting for human rights inside Iran. And when the president of the United States, amidst these protests, gets on and say, go out to the streets, take these buildings, and we'll have your back, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to that effect. And then they are inspired by that. And
he says help is on the way and things like that. Yeah.
Help is on the way, and we're locked and loaded. He used that metaphor, I believe. And then we do nothing. That is so irresponsible by the president of the United States.
Because they're actually going to get hanged for it. Like that's the thing that we had a 10-year process. The United States was involved in the last 2 years, from 2013 to 2015, and we got the Iran nuclear deal. that was believed by international organizations and the United States to actually be working. Was not a silver bullet, but it was directionally in a way that empowered moderates in Iran over hardliners. We're now back to hardliners.
The hardest of the hardliners, because they have no other way to rule but through brute force. They even need help from the Iraqi militias right now to do so. But the problem, I mean, this goes to Venezuela, it goes to Greenland,
yep.
It goes to almost every Trump foreign policy right now. He takes an action, and he says he's the only one that matters, right? You just played a clip of that. Evidently, those calls from our Arab allies in Israel didn't matter to him. He's the only one that matters. He puts out a tweet, and then what's the plan after that, President Trump? What's the strategy? And we could go on. There's many things they could do if they really wanted to help the democratic movement in Iran. They could sanction more people. They could freeze more assets. They could even do an oil blockade. They could provide more communications. There are all kinds of things if they actually had a strategy to help democratization in Iran. But I got to tell you, I don't think the president actually cares about that.
Right.
In the same way that, yes, he removed Maduro, but does he have a plan for democratic restoration in Venezuela?
No, he's got a plan for oil in Venezuela.
He doesn't have that because he doesn't really care.
Yeah. Iran, imagine welcoming Iran into the international community, supported by the people who want democracy there. What a thing. All right, Ambassador, good to see you as always. Ambassador Michael McFaul.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.